So welcome back to Mount & Blade 2 and to the second of these troop tree overviews that I'm going to be doing, and now we'll be moving on to the Khuzait Khanate, the Men of the Steppes, who of course have got their real life equivalent in factions like the Mongols, the Cumans, the Turks and the Huns, among others of course. And the Khuzaits, going into the game, anyone who knows anything about Mount & Blade will know what the Khuzaits are going to be all about as the steppe folk. Cavalry is obviously going to be their main focus and strength of course, in both quality, especially with regards to their horse archers, and with numbers. Like the Khuzait can certainly field cavalry the easiest and in the most numbers out of all of the factions in the game, which is obviously a big deal, especially on an open field, which is where they are most at home. But they don't just have that, they also have some options in their archers, they also have some infantry as well, so they're not completely helpless when it comes to fighting on foot either, but certainly cavalry is going to be their main focus. As far as downsides to the faction goes, well, probably offensive sieges would be the main thing, because of course they do have enough in their arsenal with regards to ranged units, and actually with defensive infantry as well. They can do quite reasonably actually in a defensive siege, but in an offensive siege they do struggle a little bit more, because they have to rely on their dismounted cavalry a little bit more to help them do the damage, which obviously isn't ideal, but nonetheless it is something that they do have to engage in. But without further ado, let's have a little look at their troop tree and see what they have in a little bit. So here is the Khuzait troop tree, and it is a little less versatile as you would expect than the Imperial one that we've already had a look at, but there are still numerous trees and options for you to go down. And we start off at the top with the tier 1 unit, the Khuzait Nomad, so of course take these stats with a grain of salt, because chances are they could be wrong, and also it doesn't really matter at the low tier anyway, because tier 1 units, no matter where you get them from, are all going to do pretty much the same thing. They're not really going to have armour as such, the only equipment they have is a simple blade at their side, and of course, you know, looters are pretty much going to be the only thing that they can outright outclass in a melee fight. Other than that, of course, you're just looking for them to hopefully survive a fight and upgrade into something a little bit more useful. You could use swarm tactics as well, of course, because they're reasonably cheap, well, very cheap. All of them cost around 20 to recruit. They're not that much to upkeep either, so of course if you're in a bit of a tight situation and you need to recruit a lot of units quickly just to pad out your army a little bit, maybe give your cavalry a little bit more breathing room, a little bit of disposable fodder, then the Khuzait Nomads can certainly do that for you. Just don't expect too much from them in melee. But of course, further down the tree is where you really want to go. You have two options as well. We'll go down the left-hand path first and foremost, because it is, of course, the main focus of the Khuzait Khanate, and that's going to be their cavalry. Starting off with a basic horse archer, the Khuzait Tribal Warrior. First thing to note, I think, is how early the Khuzaits can start fielding their cavalry units, or upgrading into their cavalry. I think they may be the only ones that can upgrade into cavalry at level 2. At the very least, I mean, this gives them a really good option early on, especially seeing as when you first start speccing into tier 2 units, it's going to be very early in the game when you're still facing down stuff like looters and maybe small roving bands of bandits, and horse archers are going to be very dominant against most of those, outside of maybe something like forest bandits with their ridiculously powerful longbows. But yeah, the Khuzait Tribal Warrior, of course, as horse archers, they don't have that much in terms of armour. They're very basic really, all they are is a very basic mounted archer, but the fact that they are mounted, giving them that mobility, obviously is what the Khuzaits are all about. And horse archers are one of the main ways in which you can get a really favourable kill to death ratio with your armies, and the fact that the Khuzaits can start getting into them at level 2 obviously shows their intent from an early point in their troop tree. But again, they're not that special when you compare them to the higher tiers, but just because of the class of unit that they are at tier 2, makes them a very useful tool to have in your army, and easy to recruit as well, because they're easier to find in Khuzait villages as well. The only downside is to upgrade into them at tier 2, you do still need a horse of above the base quality, so sumpter horses won't do the trick. You need like a regular horse to upgrade into, which can be a bit of a block. And it means that with your first recruitments you may have to upgrade into the infantry or sort of foot-based line of the Khuzaits, which maybe isn't ideal for you. But as soon as you start getting some horses, especially when you swear fealty to one of the lords, or whether you start building your own kingdom and get involved in some larger battles, you're never going to have issues with having enough horses to mount your men. So bear that in mind. That is the only downside really to having a cavalry unit this early in the tree, the fact that you do need a horse resource to actually upgrade into them. Moving upwards, you have another choice to make. Do you want to continue and focus on the horse archer aspect of the Khuzaits, or do you want to go for a lance/melee cavalry option? Ideally you want both, but of course the Khuzaits, the primary strength of them, as I've already said, is going to be their ranged cavalry units and the numbers that they can bring them in. Khuzait Raider at tier 3. You can see here, this is where things start to get a little bit more serious, because for a start they are actually armoured troops rather than just tribesmen that have grabbed their local horse and a bow. They're a little bit more prepared for combat because of their armour here. In addition to this, they aren't completely defenceless in melee as well. They do have the basic spear. They're obviously not going to be as good in sustained combat as the melee cavalry line that the Khuzaits have available to them. But the fact that they can defend themselves a little bit better than the tier 2 tribal warrior is a big step up at the very least. And obviously the Khuzait Raider is just a step up in every aspect really. Better at range, so if you have a look at the stats there, obviously you can see bow score 70, bow score 40. That's a big step up in terms of numbers. Obviously they may not be exact. I don't want to put too much stock in those stats, like I said, because some of them don't seem right to me. But that is the kind of improvement you can expect. Big jump up into tier 3. Further down, of course, that will only increase as we go along. The Khuzait Horse Archer, here you can see what starts to be sort of a genuine steppe warrior starting to appear. For a start, you can see the horse has got the steppe barding on it now, so the horse is significantly tankier, as well as the rider being significantly tankier with the sort of the leather lamella styled armour, which gives them a lot more survivability on the field, which of course is nice. Horse archers, you want to keep them out of harm's way for as long as possible anyway, if you can help it. But if things do start to get a little bit messy when you have better equipment and better armour, of course that will improve their chance of surviving the battle significantly. So, and that is another thing, obviously I've already said, like horse archers, you get very favourable kill-death ratios with a horse archer-based army, I should know, because the Khuzaits have been sort of my longest campaign that I've done so far, a heavily Khuzait-focused one. And because they're harder to kill, just because of their nature of harassing the enemy and kiting them around the field, horse archers generally won't die as much as other kinds of troops, which means it is easier to actually upgrade them into this late into their tree without them dying. And when you get up to stuff like tier 4 and tier 5, it's only really going to be against like genuine armies that you're going to experience that many losses anyway. Stuff like looters and bandits will cease to be an issue when you get up to this level of troop, because they're going to be easily able to deal with them. But yeah, very nice. I mean, the thing is, they do have extra ammunition as well. They sort of trade in the spear that they had as the Khuzait Raider to get a bit of extra ammunition. To be honest with you, extra ammunition is not that important. Like, it's very rare that you're going to run your ammunition supply dry, but it's nice to have nonetheless. It means that you can continue shooting pretty much indefinitely, of course. And obviously the bow skill moving up to 100, which is always nice. Then we have the tier 5 offering as far as you can take your basic Khuzait Nomad into the horse archer tree. The Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, the bow score, improving slightly again, up to 130, obviously the riding skill 130 as well. And you can see here the armour is obviously nicer once again. You have the metal Eastern lamella in the style, of course, a nice sort of Huns style helmet almost. They still have the steppe barding on their horse as well. They still have the extra ammunition. All around, they're just obviously a step up from the Khuzait Horse Archer. Very simple, but this is where you really want to be going with your Khuzait Nomad. Obviously, the downside to being up this high in the tree, with obviously the steppe barding, is rather than a regular horse, you will need war horses. Obviously, a higher quality horse to upgrade your units into it, and that is really the main issue with upgrading down this line as the Khuzaits. The fact that it does have sort of they are quite horse intensive, as you would expect, so you do need quite a lot of them if you want to build up your horde. Which is true of all of the cavalry options the Khuzait have, of which they do have 3, including their noble troop tree. So that is something to bear in mind. You are going to need a steady supply of horses from somewhere, whether you're buying them from a reliable source or whether you're looting them from large-scale battles. Ultimately, if you are involved in large-scale battles, it shouldn't be that much of a problem to keep your horses rolling in. But that is something to bear in mind nonetheless. Still, heavy horse archer, obviously, very, very solid indeed, very survivable and tanky for what they are, and of course very deadly with their bow, which is exactly what you want from roving horse raiders. However, you may want to have a bit of melee punch, which I would suggest you do need to vary your cavalry a little bit. Having only horse archers is all well and good, but if you do come up against an immoving shield wall or circle formation, and the shields absorb most of your damage, you might need something with a little bit more punch, maybe, to take advantage of some of the thin parts of the line. So how about some melee cavalry? We have the Khuzait horsemen here. Of course, the armour actually per tier is obviously going to be better for the melee cavalry, so in comparison to the Khuzait Raider, they obviously have some nice shoulder armour, which gives them a little bit more survivability, better armour in general as well, and also a shield, which is obviously a very nice thing to have when they're getting into the thick of it, so they're just going to be a little bit stronger all around when it comes to taking damage, and of course, when it comes to dishing out damage with their polearm as well, they're going to be significantly stronger as well. And heavy cavalry, as you can say, I mean, heavy cavalry is what this effectively is, maybe a lighter horse line than someone like the Vlandians or the Empire has for the Khuzaits, but ultimately it will still do the same job. I mean, a morale-shattering charge is very possible with units like the Khuzait Horsemen, but do bear in mind that other factions with regards to lance and melee cavalry do have tankier options than the Khuzait, but for the Khuzait, their lancers really are an accompaniment to their horse archers, so if you can use them in tandem with one another, it can cause utter chaos on the battlefield and leave the enemy scrambling for a position, which is very satisfying to pull off, I must say. But of course, you can always upgrade further. At tier 4 we have the Khuzait Lancer, which of course all of the skills that they need, one-handed, polearm, riding, go up once again. Here we can see that the step barding is applied to the horse, their armour is thicker, their equipment in general is better, so obviously they're just going to be better at their job in every way. The horse armour actually is a fairly significant thing for this unit, so obviously they're going to be getting stuck in a little bit more so than the equivalent horse archers, so they do want their horses to be a little bit stronger when it comes to taking damage. They themselves obviously are the same way inclined as well. But do bear in mind, once again, other factions do have all-around stronger options with their lancers. But once again, the Khuzaits are probably going to be able to field them in greater numbers, so it's really just a matter of what you think is going to suit your playstyle a little bit more. Sort of controlling this much cavalry can be a little bit of an interesting experience. I would say you can mostly leave the horse archers to do as they please, and the lancers you have a little bit of a tighter leash on, but there you go. And finally we have the Khuzait Heavy Lancer, which was a unit which up until recently was actually broken and they had tier 2 stats. Now they don't. Now they have proper stats. Their riding skill is obviously very high, which is nice, and obviously their polearm skill as well. So the brass lamella over the mail, the nice pointed helm, and still the step barding on their horse. So now obviously they are the pinnacle of what the Khuzaits can do in melee with their cavalry, and it's just a step up from what it was before. Like I said, there are factions, especially I would say sort of like the Vlandians and also the Imperial Elite Cataphract, with stronger heavy cavalry than the Khuzaits, at least in this regard. But once again, like I said, you know, those two heavy cavalry lines are noble heavy cavalry lines. It'll actually be much easier for you to field a lot more heavy lancers than they will their own heavy cavalry. So it's really a matter of, with your lance cavalry, do you want quantity or quality? Quantity, the Khuzaits have got you covered. And their quality is not bad either. I mean, they're a tier 5 heavy cavalry unit. They're going to do tons of damage in both physical terms and morale terms to the enemy. But there's no real denying that the Elite Cataphract and the Vlandian Banner Knights are going to be stronger at their job. Even stuff like the Druznik as well from the Sturgeons. But still a very fine unit to add as an accompaniment to your horse archers as well. But perhaps you do want a bit of an infantry force, want to go for an unconventional Khuzait army, or maybe you just don't have enough horses to upgrade into a fully cavalry-based army, or maybe you can foresee yourself getting involved in some sieges, in which case you'll want to go down the other route, upgrading into the Khuzait Footman, which, to be honest with you, in terms of armour, is not that much of a step up from the Khuzait Nomad, to be honest with you, but still, I mean, it is something, which is better than nothing. They also have a spear and a basic shield at their side, so you can see polearm skill, athletics, one-handed, so just a very basic tier 2 unit this. In comparison to stuff like the Imperial Infantrymen that we've seen before, I would say they're not quite as good, mainly because spears are not going to be quite as good at dealing damage. I mean, they will maybe help you a little bit more at sealing that cavalry advantage, should you need it. But the Khuzaits are pretty much well stocked for options in that regard anyway. But yeah, I mean, they're very basic. Really, the main reason you upgrade into this over the tribal warriors because you don't have horses available to you, or you've got your eye on something a little bit further down the tree. As a tier 2 unit, they're going to be outclassed by a few other factions' offerings in this regard. But now you have another choice to make. Do you want some foot archers, or do you want some melee units? Foot archers, we'll go down first of all, starting with the Khuzait Hunter, which is essentially a dismounted Khuzait Raider, so you obviously don't have the same mobility, nowhere near as much mobility in fact, but you do have a decent one-handed score, so they're capable of defending themselves in melee at the very least, even though they don't have a shield. But obviously, they're a decent foot archer, to be fair, the Khuzaits. You kind of expect that, considering they're so good with their horse archers that, you know, they wouldn't suddenly lose their ability to use their bows when they're on foot, so it's perhaps not too surprising the Khuzaits have got a decent archer line. It doesn't really hold a candle to someone like the Aserais or the Battanians or factions like that. But in comparison to someone like the Empire, who's maybe a little bit more focused on the survivability of their archers, the Khuzaits are more about getting as many arrows downrange as quickly as possible, trying to deal as much damage as possible. So it's really about what you prioritise here. And of course, if used in conjunction with the horse archers, that's just going to saturate fire even more. Moving further down, Khuzait Archer, which in terms of armour at the very least is actually more like a dismounted Khuzait Lancer, but they of course, better equipment again, nicer bow, better ammunition, all of the good stuff, and of course their bow skill increases even more. Not really much else to say really about the Khuzait Archer, if I'm being honest. And then finally, the Khuzait Marksman, which again, more like a dismounted Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, albeit with a different helm. Decently tanky, to be fair, the Khuzait Marksman, a lot of ammunition as well. But once again, if you compare them to another tier 5 archer, like something along the lines of the Imperial Palatine Guard, similar skills all around. They also have a decent pole armor score, to be fair, the Khuzait Marksman. I would say that, again, it comes down to the Palatine Guard will be tankier because of their superior Imperial armor, but the Khuzait Marksman will be able to get more damage downrange a little bit more quickly. So it's really just a matter of which you prefer out of the two. But of course, both of them, again, pale in comparison to stuff like the tier 5 offerings from the Aserai, or the noble troop line especially from the Battanians, but we'll get onto that another day. You also have an infantry option as the Khuzaits. I mean, it's not the first thing you think of when you think of the Khuzaits. You don't really intend to build a large infantry force, but they do have one nonetheless. And it is important, I think, to mix some of these lads in, because otherwise you will come a little bit unstuck when it comes to siege battles, and that's not really what you want. Obviously, it is a weakness of the Khuzait overall. Like I said, attacking in a siege battle can be a little bit... It's not efficient for them to do in a lot of cases, because they're going to take losses more so than maybe other factions, because they don't have the tools to clear sections as well. But Khuzait Spearmen, I mean, for their tier, this is pretty decent armour that they're wearing, and they're a very good defensive unit of infantry, which again plays into the fact that I actually think they're decent on a defensive siege, because if you have these guys, obviously guarding the gate, putting up some nice shield walls, they're going to be pretty effective at that. They've got a large wicker shield, spears. Of course, the problem comes when it comes to dealing damage. Like, spearmen in general are not all that damaging in the game as it stands, but they can hold for a decently long time, and that's really the best you can hope. I mean, especially if you want to get into some hammer and anvil charges and try and set those up with stuff like your heavy lancers, then the spears can definitely do a job for you there. And ultimately, it does pay to make your army a little bit versatile rather than just a full cavalry stack. But don't expect them to be all that damaging. Obviously, other factions, pretty much every other faction in the game has got access to more varied infantry than the Khuzaits, and obviously better infantry as well. But the Spearmen will do their job for a tier 3 unit just fine. And the same goes for the tier 4 unit. Obviously, the Khuzait Spear Infantry, once again, the equipment gets a little bit better overall. They get a better spear, better shield. But they do have a little bit of extra utility in the fact that they've got those javelins on their back, so they will be able to do a little bit more damage. As the melee fight approaches, they'll be able to throw a few javelins in, do a little bit of initial damage before the melee gets underway, before being slightly better spearmen all around than the tier 3 offering as well. So, again, despite the fact that infantry is certainly not the Khuzait's focus, I mean, this is a decent line of infantry. The spears will not steer you far wrong when it comes to their ability to hold a position and defend for an extended period of time. Just don't expect them to work wonders with regards to the damage they deal. Then, however, at tier 5, we have a very interesting unit, because we have a bit of a hidden gem among the Khuzait roster, really. The Khuzait Darkhan is actually, to my mind, one of the finest tier 5 infantry units in the game. Just because of its versatility. Once again, you can see they have a pole on, they have the javelin still, they have the shield, they have a really good one-handed score as well at 130. Just overall, a really versatile unit of infantry. The main issue the Darkhan has is you're not actually likely to have that many of them, because of course most players will go down the cavalry tree and prioritise that, so any Darkhans you do get are going to be few and far between. But if you did want to invest more heavily into the Khuzait infantry, to be fair, the Darkhans are a very, very fine unit indeed. And if you were focused on sort of siege battles more so, but you still wanted to be the Khuzaits, I prioritise the Darkhan because, like I said, as a tier 5 infantry unit, they really are very good indeed. There are factions which obviously prioritise infantry a little bit more, and in terms of damage and tankiness, there will be better offerings than the Darkhan out there, but it will not steer you far wrong. I was surprised at how good the Darkhan really was because of how versatile it was. I really like the Cuman style helm that they wear as well, even if the colour doesn't quite match up with the metal lamella that they wear. But of course, this isn't the only troop tree the Khuzaits have access to. They also have their noble troops, which we'll get onto right now. So as with the others, of course, it's a very linear tree, this, for the Khuzaits, and perhaps unlike the others, though, the vast majority of the other noble troop trees are a unit of heavy lance / melee cavalry. That's not the case with the Khuzaits. They double down on their horse archers, so you have an alternative horse archer line if you want, and overall a superior horse archer line, it must be said as well. Starting off with the Khuzait's noble son, which in comparison, obviously, they have slightly higher bow skill and such to the tribal warrior that the regular Khuzait nomads can be upgraded into. And also slightly better equipment. I mean, not that much better, to be fair. I mean, their armour is very slightly better, emphasis on very. But overall, they're just a little bit better than the tribal warrior. Obviously, you do pay a little more for them as well. But overall, you've really got your eye on the later units in these trees. Like, early on, these units can actually be fairly... Like, why are you even recruiting them? Like, they're harder to find, they're fairly expensive for what they offer, but later on, it is more than worth it, trust me. Then we move into the Khuzait Quangli, which, again, the equivalent to the Khuzait Raider. They actually have a helmet which is not quite as good, but overall, again, the equipment is very similar. A bow, a spear, obviously arrows as well. But they are slightly better at range than the Khuzait Raider once again. And that is really the theme until we start getting into the higher tiers, where the gap in quality starts to widen a little bit more. But the Quangli will still perform perfectly well when it comes to being a horse archer, of course. Tier 4 we have the Khuzait Torgud, and here we can start to see a little bit more of a difference when you compare them to the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, which goes in for just a bow and extra ammunition and then a sidearm. The Khuzait Torgud is far more versatile. They have the bow, they have the arrows, of course, but they also have a shield and a glaive, which makes them effectively a bit of a hybrid between melee cavalry and horse archers, and they're very good at it as well. I mean, just having a look at some of their stats, obviously polearm is very good. Their bow skill is actually better as well than the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, so the equivalent tier 5 unit in terms of being a horse archer is actually less skillful than the tier 4 offering from the noble tree. So this is where you start to see the investment into this unit line really start to pay off a little bit more from tier 4 on upwards. Also the armour, though, I mean, the armour of the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer is better. I mean, the armour for the Torgud is effectively the same as the regular Khuzait Horse Archer, but the versatility is really what you get from this unit. Starting on upwards, then the tier 5 unit, the Khuzait Keshig, and you can see the bow score is in excess of 200 at this point. So this is where you really start to see a world-destroying horse archer start to come forward. More ammunition as well. Obviously the step barding on the horse is a thing ever since the Torgud as well, so again, tanky horse. The glaive is still there, brass lamella, obviously that nice helm that they wear as well. All around a really fantastic horse archer unit. And then finally, of course, the tier 6 unit with a bow score of 280 and a polearm score of 220, riding of 220. Again, take that with a grain of salt, they could be slightly wrong. But the Khuzait Khan's Guard, which is quite comfortably the strongest horse archer you're going to be able to stock your army with. Again, don't expect to have too many of them because they take quite a long time to get up to tier 6 from the base of the tree. And also, of course, you know, the Khuzait noble sons in general are going to be a little rarer than the Khuzait nomads at the local villages in the Khuzait territories. So that is something worth bearing in mind. But obviously, very, very effective with their bows, devastating in fact. And then, of course, really strong actually when it comes to wielding their glaive as well. So all around, definitely one of the show-stopping units in the game. I mean, it's obvious perhaps that the Khuzaits are going to have the best horse archers in the game, but they have access to that regular horse archer line, which is very strong, and then this noble horse archer line, which in the final tiers is incredibly powerful. Of course, one of the main things is the fact that you have access to that quantity of cavalry as well, like I said, so it's not necessarily all about the quality for the Khuzaits, just the fact they can saturate the enemy line with so many numbers. You know, when you have a huge horde of horse archers circling the enemy position, and then maybe backing them up with a few charges from your lance cavalry, any foot archers and infantry you have can then be moved in to finish them off. It's a very intimidating sight. It's very fun to be at the head of as well, I have to say. I can definitely vouch for how much fun the Khuzaits are to play as. But yeah, the Khan's Guard, definitely the strongest horse archers that you're going to be able to recruit. Unsurprising from the Khuzaits. But yeah, that was the Khuzait troop tree. Not too many surprises there from what you were thinking the Khuzaits would be all about. The Darkhan is a bit of a hidden gem in their roster, I would suggest, but other than that, horse archers, you know, backed up with lance cavalry, infantry and foot archers a bit of an afterthought to help and facilitate your cavalry is going to be the way to go. Next, I think we'll have a look further west, and I think we'll take a look at the Vlandians, I think, just to sort of run the width of Calradia. So yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found it somewhat informative. Obviously, again, the numbers might be slightly wrong, so really it's just sort of a surface level look at these factions, to be honest with you. But yeah, I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.